Brett Chang, welcome. So glad to have you, man.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. As I just told you, I'm a big fan, and so it's great to be on the pod.
Well, we're a big fan of the Peak, so this is a dual thing. This is great. So, I mean, let's talk about your own growth because it's been so rapid. Like you've been into entrepreneurship pretty early. Why? Like, what got you into it? How long have you been doing this kind of stuff?
Yeah, for better or for worse, it's funny. There was no reason why I should be an entrepreneur. I went to school. I went to U of T for history and political science, so nothing to do with business at all. I had no
Yeah.
business background. The one thing I would say, and I think this is something that I think is not given enough credit, is I grew up in politics. And so when I was 16, I was knocking on doors for different candidates, and I was working on political campaigns at both the central level and the local level. And I ended up working, my first job out of university was in politics. And I do feel like a lot of the skills that I learned on campaigns were really transferable to entrepreneurship. Being thrown into a new situation and having to start something from scratch, that's, I think, very transferable. And so that's kind of where my interest in entrepreneurship came from, in that I was building these campaigns from nothing, but I thought, well, I might as well try to make, or at least try to make a little bit more money and do some more interesting stuff. And so that kind of led me to entrepreneurship.
That's awesome. So yeah, and for a lot of people, sometimes it's just doing early sales. Did you actually enjoy the door-to-door knocking and some of that stuff? I mean, I've done it, started a landscaping business where I literally walked up to people's doors. I actually enjoyed it. And it's the same in campaigning, right? In a lot of cases, you're just like in small funded campaigns going to people's houses and saying, hey, can we have a chat?
Yeah, it builds one resilience because you'll get told, as you know, a lot of no's, and there might be some angry people in there as well. And so being able to just kind of move on from that, I think, is really important. Two, I think just trying different things when talking to people and gaining those social skills was really important. I would kind of figure out what messages worked, what didn't, what was the best way to draw someone into a conversation or figure out who they were voting for. So that was super helpful. And I still use that today when I pitch people on things or when I try to sell a product. I've kind of, I hone in on what those best messages are. And so that was super helpful. And it's funny, I've listened to, obviously, I listened to a lot of these podcasts of entrepreneurs, and a bunch of them, not a bunch, but I think a disproportionate amount are Mormons. And that's because they get sent on these missions where they have to go to
Mm.
these random countries and they proselytize the local communities, which means they're doing the exact same thing. But that's a tough job. You're trying to convince people to accept their faith. And so it's I do think there's a strain between people who do that type of work in entrepreneurship.
Your first venture's Line 6, or did you have some earlier things before that too?
Yeah, it's funny. Like I'm trying to think back now. So my path was I left university. I went into politics. From politics, I like didn't like it at all. Working full time in it, and so I left. I just wanted to get into tech. I was like pretty desperate to get into tech, and I wasn't really sure why, except the fact that it seemed exciting and there's a lot going on, a lot of money being thrown around. And so I thought, how can I break into there? And I found this place called Extreme Labs. They were at the time a mobile development agency based in Toronto, and they were one of the few tech companies in the city. At the time, Toronto was not a tech hub at all. There was maybe 10, 15 people at Google or at Twitter Canada, but it was very small still. And so Extreme Labs was one of these places that you could kind of network your way into. So I tried to hustle my way in with cold emails and calling people, and eventually I got this junior job there. I did that for about a year in sales. And then it was time for me to leave. They got acquired. They were laying people off. And so I left and started this thing called Adrenaline Digital. It was an agency we did. We were doing public affairs campaigns, digital public affairs campaigns for clients. That was great. We had a bit of a tension or falling out with our co-founder. Nothing against him. Great guy. It was just not the right fit at the time. And so, we kind of left that business and moved over to Line 6.
Cool. So Line 6, like let's talk about the genesis because all of these intersect in a way. Like Adrenaline Digital kind of intersects with what you're doing now. Line 6 is kind of, well, it's obvious. We'll talk about what it is, but it's going to be political if it's in Toronto and it's transportation. So yeah, let's get into Line 6 and what drew you to that for as a starting point.
The only solace I have in my career is that everything does kind of connect in one way or another. And
It
that
does, yeah.
is, it gives me the confidence to go, it actually gives me a lot of confidence to go and do other stuff because I kind of have seen now how just having a bias for action will lead you to other opportunities. So Line 6 was this idea that we had where we would, and it was kind of inspired by stuff going on in the US, but we identified this one transit route, this community called Liberty Village in Toronto that was poorly served by the streetcar. And we thought that we could run or pop up a bus, a shuttle that would take people from Liberty Village to the downtown core, and that we would build this software platform with the bigger vision being that anybody could start their own transit network. They could crowdsource their funds, they could charter a bus, do ticketing, all of that on one platform. It was a good idea in theory. Kind of big issues. One, obviously, like you've said, regulatory. I think by the letter of the law, it was illegal. And two, the business itself was not good. It's expensive to run these buses. Public transit is a loss leader for a reason. And I don't think there's a way around that. So anyways, we eventually got shut down, but it was fun to do it. It got a bunch of attention. And it's funny because all of our contemporaries in the US, they also kind of shut down too.
Yeah, yeah. And for those that don't know, like Liberty Village, I describe as very Williamsburg-esque in Toronto, very popular area, lots of young people, entrepreneurs there. So I could totally see it, right? Like you probably heard a whole bunch like, let's build this, let's build this. The really cool thing for me looking back at it is you guys got a ton of earned media early from basically nothing. Like how did you do that? And it obviously informs your strategy later, right?
Yeah, that's what we call the stunt mindset. And,
I
it's
love it.
thinking back to it, I think we just kind of hit a nerve, right? Like it was a issue that a lot of people felt they were pretty desperate for a solution, and we brought a solution forward. And that kind of captured the mind share of the media and the community. And so it's funny. I remember the way we got that media is that to gain traction for the service, Taylor, my co-founder, who's still my co-founder today, we stood on the street and at Strawn at this intersection, and we handed out flyers to a bunch of people and saying like, "Hey, do you hate the streetcar? Come try our service. We're launching this day." And we just actually got one of the people who took our thing was a producer at AM 640, a radio station here in the city. We got on that radio station, and then there was a follow-on effect. Other people heard it, other reporters heard it, and then we got on Metro Morning the next day, and then we were in the Star, and it all kind of snowballed very quickly. But that's kind of how it got started. And so, yeah, media pitching, there's no science. It's not a science. It really is an art, and that's how we did it. But everyone's got their own approach.
Would you say, I mean, it sounds like it all cascades together, right? So as long as you can get on one publication, you can quickly use that as leverage to get into the next one, right? Like, hey, we were just on this. Do you want to cover us? Can we get an embargo? Is that a little bit of it?
Yeah, there definitely is a hype cycle. And so if you do have something that you can generate that hype cycle around, and that's not everything, right? Like I get pitched a lot now for ThePeak, but most of it, you won't get any hype at all. It's not that exciting. If you're just announcing a fundraising announcement, there's lots of fundraising announcements. If you do have something that can tap into a public issue or something top of mind for people that's topical, I think you can generate that hype cycle. And that's kind of what we're doing with ThePeak now. Like, I think, we're getting people to share it, and more people are seeing it, and they're seeing lots of other people they know share it. And that really does help us with the snowball effect.
Yeah, we're definitely going to get into the viral growth of ThePeak because it's been really amazing to watch. But so LineSix, it doesn't work out, right? But then you go immediately into another controversial transportation area that is Uber Canada at the time. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, look, and again, I think the great thing about LineSix was that through that, I got to know this guy, Ian Black, who I think is the GM of Shopify Canada now, but he was among the people launching Uber X in Toronto at the time. And so I got to know him. They were hiring for a marketing person. I applied. They liked the stuff I did with LineSix because it was obviously in a similar vein to what they were trying to do. And so he brought me in, I interviewed, they gave me a job, and then I was on the marketing team at Uber, which was just an incredible experience to be at another very top of mind company that was getting a lot of attention at the time. It was very controversial and was growing extremely quick. And it was great to have kind of a front row seat to that story.
So you come into Uber, it's 2016. I remember walking to work, which was the law firm for me at the time. I remember seeing the taxi strike, the famous taxi strike going down University with just all the honked horns. Unpopular at the time, right? Like if you lived in Toronto, I'm sure it was like this for other major cities, and you got an Uber around that time, taxi cabs would actually cut in front of you, stop. Like they really felt like they owned the entire market and that there should be no alternatives. You talk about facing that mindset in a company like Uber.
It's funny, I have a lot of respect for Travis Kalanick. To start a company like Uber is really hard. And it's not just Uber, it's any of these controversial businesses. It could be cannabis, it could be psychedelics, it could be transportation, whatever it is. It's very challenging for a bunch of reasons. One, because like you said, you just have a opponent and there is animosity towards you, and you have to face that every day. But the second thing is that, if I wanted to take a meeting to do a partnership, actually, I'll give you an example. The guy who sat beside me at Uber, a good friend of mine, he was doing partnerships for the company, and we wanted to do a bunch of partnerships. We had this very popular service, and we would love to do credit card partnerships with RBC, or we wanted to do, a telco partnership or whatever it was. And these companies wouldn't even meet with us because it was so controversial at the time that they
Wow.
couldn't wrap their heads around it. And so there's a lot of barriers beyond just the opposition you get. There's barriers to actually doing business that make it really, really tough to do. And so it takes a very special person to be able to drive through that. But it was really good to see. And if you can kind of see it all unfold, you do get a better idea of the trajectory of these types of companies, which truly is a lot of opposition at first. But if you can really get through that and establish yourself, it's a much clearer path after.
So getting a taste for that early opposition to something that was going to become inevitable, is that what led you to then coming into the cannabis fund?
Yeah, kind of. Like I have to say that I wasn't as scared of it as other
Yeah.
people were at the time, just because I kind of knew where it was going. Like I understood that there was going to be this period where it was very controversial. There'd be a lot of opposition to it. There was actually less organized opposition to cannabis than there was Uber, but there'd be a lot of opposition to it. But eventually it would become mainstream. It was going to become a legal substance. And at this time, Trudeau had committed to it in the election, and he was moving forward with it legislatively. So at this point, it was inevitable that it was going to become a mainstream legal substance that people would use the same way that they drink alcohol. So, it was fun to think about because it was such a nascent space. There wasn't much going on. There were no brands at the time. It wasn't even legal yet in Canada. There was only medical production going on. And so it was kind of tabula rasa. And that was exciting to think about. And, like you said, I think it was interesting to see how it could apply the experience I had with Uber being in a highly regulated, controversial industry and apply that to cannabis. So, we just started doing this thing called Leaf Forward, where we would host monthly meetups in Toronto, where we'd bring together a bunch of folks in the cannabis industry. And it started really small with about maybe 15, 20 people coming out to them. And then as the boom around cannabis cycle happened, we started seeing more and more people come. And at our peak, we were getting 200, 250 people out to every meetup.
So I want to take a step back quickly too, because a lot of people have started businesses during the pandemic, and we could say, and we'll talk about the peak and how it started. But you seem like the type of person, Brett, that like is going to continue to have businesses forever. And I say that because coming out of Uber, right? This is a company you could have easily stayed at like forever and been happy to do so. Would have been lucrative. Would have been great. It sounds like even throughout Uber, you learned a lot there, but always, is it true that in the back of your mind, you felt like you were waiting for the next thing and to grab the old co-founders and to launch something? Like, talk me through that process, because you had a great position there.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think it was pretty good. I think the thing for me is that I had just kind of reached my plateau of learning at Uber. I had gone through this incredible experience and met so many great people. But at this point, when I was leaving Uber, it was a big company at that time. It had, 7,000 employees around the world. It had a bureaucracy to it, which is exactly what it should have at that stage. But that wasn't the environment for me. I kind of peaked in my learning there. And so I wanted to go off and try something else entirely. And, I was always one that to think that if the opportunity presented itself, I would take it. And this opportunity did present itself. And so I made the decision to move. And it's interesting. It's an interesting question about when you actually do that. But I do think that you get the feeling like you're getting bored, and it's tough for me to stay somewhere if I'm bored. That's just the way I am. It's not true for everyone. I have know lots of people, good friends of mine, who stay at these companies for 5, 6, 7 years and still feel stimulated and engaged, and that's great. But for me, I felt like I had done everything I wanted to do at Uber, and I was ready to move on.
For sure. And I totally agree with that too. Like, there's a little bit of a naivete in the current culture that's just like, oh, if you should just leave your job and start a business. I actually really don't I think that's bad advice for a lot of people. I think there are some people who are really, really great specialists and will be incredible at something during their lives. And there's some of us that just like to, for some reason, try to do everything and stay up all night and do all that kind of work. I don't think it's necessarily a lifestyle for everybody. And I think you kind of know what person you are.
Yeah, and like I'll be honest with you, some days it's very fun to have your own business, but a lot of days it really does suck. Like right now I feel like I'm under a lot of pressure. We just raised a bit of money. I got a lot of people who read this product every day. We have to make sure it's good. I make mistakes all the time. People tell me I make mistakes now. I've got to sell a bunch because I want this thing to be sustainable and profitable in the long term. And we have limited runway because we're a media business. And so it's not, it's not as glamorous as they make it seem like in the culture.
100%. Well, let's get into the peak because so much has happened, and I'm sure you're riding a roller coaster right now, my friend. Like a lot has happened that's been amazing, and at the same time, as you said, you're feeling the pressure of all that success too. People want to know what's next. They want to see you scale up another 10x. How did it start? I mean, just looking at some of your writings, I just get the feeling of somebody that wanted to launch something, right? The 1 week startup is a perfect example, this newsletter that you created. But yeah, let's talk about the genesis of the peak.
Yeah, it's funny. So, with Leap Forward, we were doing this meetup and we eventually wanted to capture some of the upside of this industry. And we thought we had built out we had built out this network of people in the industry, but also we saw a lot of entrepreneurial activity happening. And our thesis around it was that there would be, once legalization happened, there would be an explosion of entrepreneurial activity. There would be lots of brands created, new product formulations, all of these types of verticals would emerge post legalization, which would be an incredible opportunity. And we wanted to be kind of the pre-seed investors in that. So we went out there and we raised $1 million fund. And despite actually, in the end, I think we were wrong about a lot of those hypotheses that we had. But I still think we'll get a return for our investors. But anyways, what ended up happening was we made 6 investments. The industry did not shake out the way we thought it would shake out. We didn't feel comfortable at a certain point making any further investments. So we returned a lot of the money to our investors, which I think was the right call. And this was about all in the summer when we made that decision. And so at that point, myself, Alex, and Taylor, my 2 co-founders, and I, we were trying to figure out what our next step would be. And the one thing that we've always kind of been interested in is media. I think we obviously read a lot of media. We pay close attention to the Canadian media industry. Taylor himself has a media not-for-profit that he runs. So it's something we've always been engaged with. And it's something that we can do. Like, I think it's we're okay writers, but we're okay writers. We kind of know a bit about growth. And so we could kind of put it together. And at the time, we had a bunch of time on our hands because it was the pandemic and we were unemployed. And the combination of those 2 things meant that we could actually do a lot of writing, which, as you kind of alluded to, I was doing originally with this 1 week startup thing. As I kind of figured out what to do with that, I had this thing about Notion I was working on at the same time. And the Peak was just one of many projects that we were all kind of working on to see if anything clicked. And so the Peak is a daily newsletter that covers the top 4 to 5 stories in Canadian global business and tech news in a bite-sized, fun, informative tone and format. And, it's very heavily influenced from our US contemporaries like Morning Brew and The Hustle and The Skim. But, we couldn't find a Canadian equivalent for that. So we brought it here. We started writing it during the pandemic when we had all this time, and we shared it with friends and family. We got great feedback on it, and we kind of grew it from there.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, we'll definitely push out the Peak, and if you're listening, you have to subscribe to it. I subscribe to it. I read it every day. It's Canadian, bite-sized news, focused on the actual industry, and you're working with real Canadian tech companies throughout it. So like super awesome. But the thing that I really love about you guys is how transparent you've been in growing the business, right? Like you've made a post about how you got your first 1,000 subscribers. Now you guys are well over 15,000, I think. Let's talk about that. I mean, how did you guys you've got a newsletter, you're writing, you're putting all this effort in. If anybody's written a newsletter daily, they know how difficult that is. That takes a lot of time, a lot of productivity. How did you get it out there?
Yeah, like look, on the writing component, the only reason we could do it was the pandemic. If it was and we kind of look back on all of them that we've put together, but we've never missed a day. And the other thing we've never had to do, because we split the writing between the 3 of us, is we've never had to pass a day off to someone else. So there's never been a moment where I've been like, oh, I can't do tonight. Can, Alex, can you take it? Or Taylor, can you take it? We've never had to do that. And it truly is because it's the pandemic. And thankfully, we are hiring a daily newsletter writer who will take on a lot of that work. And so hopefully we would never will miss it. But so the writing component, that was only possible because the pandemic, on the growth side, I think what we found early on was just a product market fit. And so we got a lot of good early feedback from people that this is something that they found valuable. And we would look at that in the numbers and we would see, open rates north of 40%. And so all of these were indications that it was going in the right direction. And then we took the business iteratively. So, we started to see, could we grow this with some paid reliably? Could we keep the open rates up if we were to grow it? Could we start selling a few ads here and there where advertisers are interested in this type of channel? And once we kind of checked off all those boxes, I think we had a lot of confidence that this was probably what we should focus on in all of our different businesses and see through.
And going from those first 1,000 subscribers to the 15,000, what worked, what didn't? I mean, you guys have also been super open about experimenting, right? TikTok grabbed Jack Armstrong from TSN lately. You guys are clear, like you're willing to try new things, and it's just awesome to see. So, what's working? What didn't work? What are some
Yeah.
tips you can give others that are in the same process right now?
Well, yeah, you got to throw stuff against the wall and you have to look for signals of what's working, what's not, both look in signals in terms of the numbers and track all of it, but also just in terms of kind of feedback quantitatively you're getting from people. So, our best performing channel, and this is something that I think is underutilized by a lot of people, is as we kind of talked about earlier, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great channel. I know it's a good channel for you too, Mark, but
Right.
the great thing about it is there's not a ton of content. So, you're not competing with a lot of noise out there. The second thing is that the network effect really does apply where you post it and your whole network sees it. But then anyone who likes it, their network sees it. Anyone who comments on it, their network sees it. And so between the lack of content, it means it sticks around longer, and the network effect, you can get massive organic reach. And so the best tactic that we've done on growth has been me just convincing a bunch of people to share it, the peak on LinkedIn. And so everybody I know, I like messaged, and I still have more people to go through, but I'm trying to get to every single person I've ever met and say, hey, can you share the peak on LinkedIn? And some of them get 3, 4, 5 subscribers out of it, but some of them get 50 to 100 subscribers out of it. It's a bit of a crapshoot in that regard. But, I think for us, it's just getting more and more people to share it. And that is our best channel. And that kind of is connected to the referral program, where we give people individual codes, unique codes that they can use to share the peak, and they get merch out of it. Between those two tactics, that's our best growth channel, at least organically.
Yeah, that's really awesome to see. I mean, organic whenever you can get it is obviously amazing. And that story that you had, I think you post about it in the first 1,000 posts where you and the co-founders literally just reach out to people and say, hey, can you share this? It's awesome.
And that's the other thing too, is that I would encourage people, the build and open stuff I think is just interesting content, and we like to record it. It's nice to have a bit of a journal, but it's also a great growth tactic, because that stuff I post on LinkedIn about how TikTok ads are doing, or about how we're using LinkedIn to grow, that whole all that content is just a great growth channel for us, because it gets people's attention. People look into us and they might just be interested in the content itself, but then they also will learn about the newsletter and they'll subscribe. So that's a whole other kind of growth strategy, and we're going to do a lot more of that moving forward.
So I look at you guys. I mean, you've been successful in this area. It's just, I have to ask you this because it's such a tech term in terms of growth hacking and growth marketing. Having done it now and having worked at a place like Uber, which was huge, obviously, there's network effects there. What are some of the bigger misconceptions around those terms that you would give to others now that are just starting out?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'd caveat our success. I think it's still very early. And I was just telling you, looking in isolation at the numbers, I go, it's funny. Somebody told me this recently. I was talking to them and they said, oh, you've only got to 15,000. And that made me feel pretty bad. But, it doesn't, when you're looking at it in isolation, it feels like we're going in the right direction, but I still feel like we have a long way to go before I'm satisfied with where we're at. So I think it's too early to call it a success. But in terms of the growth hacking, there's nothing wrong with the term per se. I think it's just a lot of work. I think that's the one thing people take for granted, is that, we truly are in the do things that don't scale piece, where it's not just us coming up with some like brilliant idea and hitting a button, and next thing you know, we've got 5,000 subscribers. You have to do this brick by brick, and every subscriber matters. And so you're going to pick up 5 subscribers here with this thing you do. You're going to pick up 10 here with this thing you do. And cumulatively, that will, kind of send you in the right direction. But there is no magic solution to this. Like this LinkedIn outreach, I'm sending videos to people. So I'm sitting here and I'm recording video messages to people, and people don't get a lot of video messages on LinkedIn. And I'm asking them to please share it on LinkedIn. Some people do, some people don't. But, that takes a lot of time. And so that's technically a growth hack, but it's not a magical formula.
That's the perfect example, right? Like you could make a post saying like, hey, the new way to get people to come and subscribe is to make videos to each individual person. That is not a magic bullet. You actually have to
Yeah.
sit there and
Yeah.
research the person and make a video that's worth opening. And that is hard. That's going to take time. And it's frankly going to be uncomfortable. It's going to
Well, it's
be
like,
uncomfortable
yeah,
and a lot of time spent, right?
it's like what you do with the podcast. It's like, you have to split the podcast in the different clips and you have to get that out. And like, that's like, it's all work and it does work. Like you do see the return on it, but it's not easy.
Let's talk a little bit about that and just productivity in general, because splitting out the podcast, writing posts about it a week, it takes more time than I think. One of the biggest flaws in just human psyche is how much time we think things are going to take. It's like, oh yeah, I can take that on. I can do that. And then you realize the actual hours spent preparing and doing things. So look, writing a newsletter like you guys write professionally down the peak, seriously love it. A lot of work. I have no doubt writing something like that would be difficult. What's the best environment for writing for you? How do you stay productive? How do you mentally juggle that task of doing that every 3 days right now?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I'm terrible at productivity and I listen to podcasts like this to learn from others about how I can get better. The one thing that drives me with the newsletter is knowing the shame I will feel if I do not do my part. So if I don't write my story one day, the shame I will feel with my co-founders being frustrated and upset with me, that drives me to do it. And then also knowing that I let all the people that read the peak down, that also really upsets me. So that's my number one driver. So if there's any productivity recommendation, if you can create an environment where you feel so
Shame.
much pressure and so much shame if you don't do something, that like I think is a really good motivator. And it still takes me time. I still have to write my story for today, but I know I will, because if I don't, it'll be just so embarrassing. So that's one bad piece of advice. Yeah, and I think on everything else, the tough thing with entrepreneurship, and it's something that I'm sure you kind of go through too, is that you wake up in the morning and you have to figure out what to do. Every day, you got to juggle your different priorities, and should I focus today on sales? Should I focus today on growth? And that is a real juggling act, at least in the early days, that is challenging to manage for sure.
No, that is really challenging. So you wake up in the morning, and if you check your email first and you just get sucked into that, half the day is gone and you don't really know if you've actually been productive. So do you guys what do the three of you use? Is it OKRs? What do you use for, hey, these are the big goals for the year, to actually keep you guys grounded on that right now?
Yeah, like the one thing I really do use as our North Star is if it's not growing the newsletter, or like if there's no way that what we're doing has like a direct impact on growth or sales, then we shouldn't be working on it. And so that's a good way to look at things, because it does get you to say no to a lot more. And I can give you an example. Occasionally we will write longer form Saturday emails, which are kind of deep dives into different companies. So I wrote one about Farm Boy, I wrote one about Cargo Jet, and I think they're great. Like I actually like them. I like writing them, but it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of energy of mine, and there's no direct correlation between those pieces and growth or sales. I could convince myself that tangentially there's like something to be had there, but there's no direct correlation. And it was kind of frustrating for me because I like it. I think it's good for the brand, but the other guys would tell me, I don't see it. I don't see how this impacts our business at all. And so I put it on the shelf. And I agreed with them, because it's true. There is no metric that shows me that this is contributing to growth or sales. So that's a really good way to look at it in terms of prioritizing what you should work on and what you shouldn't be working on.
Yeah, it comes back to, what are you willing to say no to, right? There's so many different things that seem attractive, but sometimes you have to put away things that you really don't want to, or that are really cool at the time.
Yeah.
All right, you guys had some other big news in raising the seed round, $350,000. That's awesome. I mean, that keeps you going for quite a bit. Talk us through that process. Like, who did you reach out to get the investment? Like, there's a total sales angle there. So how did you guys tackle that?
Super interesting. We had no intention of raising money when we started the peak. In fact, we were starting the peak with the idea that we would have this bootstrapped media business that could generate enough for us to earn a nice salary and, maybe grow it into an asset that we could then get acquired and have an exit. I think the challenge for us was that we were really enjoying the peak. We saw signs that it was going in the right direction. We could have continued to bootstrap it, but it would be a lot of our own personal money, because it's a chicken and the egg issue. For us to earn ad revenue, we have to have an audience big enough that it's
Hmm.
compelling to advertisers. And to do that, we had to put some money behind it. And so the challenge was we would take a lot of our money and put it behind the peak. And then it would also take time for us to grow the audience at the spend that we were willing to allocate to it from our own budgets. And by that point, I think there'd be one, two, or maybe all three of us would decide that we have to go get jobs. We can't work for nothing forever. And at some point, we have to make a call. So on the investment side, what it helped us do is, one, it gives us a salary, which means we can all dedicate ourselves to this business and growing it and selling ads. Two, It gives us a budget for growth, which is really important. So we can now experiment even more with paid advertising and different channels for us, which is awesome. And so that was the initial thinking behind why we raised in terms of the mechanics of actually how we do it. The only advice I can give on that, and this is not something that can happen overnight, I was very fortunate that I have just throughout my career built a network of people that are now interested in investing in these types of ventures. And because of that, it was a lot easier. So I could go back to my network of people I used to work with who are now doing some angel investing. And then, it's like, I think all investing works like this, but they'll introduce you to someone else and who might be interested, so on and so forth. And so it's a lot of that. And that's just me being fortunate that I have this network. If I didn't, it'd be a lot tougher. And I've done it before where you don't. And it's very challenging to find the people, to convince them because they don't know who you are. And so that was that was the one big advantage that we had.
Yeah, especially in seed and angel, right? Like you're really investing
Totally.
in an idea in the team, and if you don't know them, it's just that much harder.
That's exactly it. And so, I think that's the other reason why we decided to raise is that, we kind of went through we did an exercise of our own to see how we'd go about doing this. And, one of the big reasons why people don't raise, I think this is a valid one, is that it takes a lot of time and energy. But, kind of going through the motions, we realized that we probably could do this fairly quickly. It took us about a month and a half. And so, it all kind of went according to plan too. We reached out to the people who were the lowest hanging fruit for us. Two people actually reached out to us saying they wanted to invest. So we started with them. We had early conversations with them. They agreed that they'd put some money in. They introduced us. One of them introduced us to David Scott at The Logic. He came through saying that he'd want to invest as well. And then it was kind of and then I started reaching out to other Uber people, and I was a snowball.
That's awesome. So glad to hear that. I mean, so you alluded to this before, but you've got investors. I've been in some of those meetings now. I mean, so you're at the 15,000 subscribers. What does next year look like? What do the next 3 years look like? Like, what are some of those targets that you're thinking of? What are you guys dealing with now?
Yeah, like look, I want to get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of March. I would love to get to
Wow.
100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. It's going to be like a real grind to do that, I think. And then in parallel, I would like to be profitable by the end of the year. So that I guess technically means we need to sell somewhere in the range of 350 to $400,000 worth of ads. And so that's it'll be interesting to see if we can accomplish it. I think we can. I feel good about it, but actually that's not true. It depends on the day. I feel good about it today, but that's our plan. And our investors are great. They're super helpful. Whenever we need something, they're always happy to provide advice or connect us to someone who can provide advice. And so that's great. And we didn't raise any venture money. It's just angels, and we're all aligned on the direction of the business and where everyone wants to take it. And so that's super helpful. And then, thinking about the future, it's funny, like I think we've decided as a team that we're going to focus on growing this daily newsletter, at least for the next month, 2 months, to a certain point. And once we get to a certain scale, then we'll start considering whether it makes sense to do, as some of our US comparables do, start different outlets and different properties and all of that.
One thing I'm interested from you too, Brett, is like you as part of this have gotten to it's a different view you have, right? To actually compile the news and see everything in Canada in that way. What sorts of things have you learned and what do you hope to see from Canada's like tech ecosystem specifically in the next few years based on everything that you've seen, just even putting together the peak? Like how's the country doing in your mind? Are there any interesting things that you learned just doing this?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do agree. There's Alex Danko at Shopify wrote a piece about what he sees as the deficits in the Canadian tech ecosystem. And my experience, at least in the fundraising side, and it's not a lot of experience, but some experience, and knowing other people who have gone down that road as well, I do think many of his critiques are true and accurate. That's a cultural issue, so I'm not sure how you change that in the near term. I think on the venture side, the interesting thing of what's going on, or at least on the startup side, sorry, the interesting thing, there's a couple interesting things that are going on in Canada that we really should be doubling down on. I saw yesterday, or I wrote about yesterday, how there's a big boom in carbon capture technology. That type of stuff I think is really interesting and is right in our sweet spot and something we can do a great job on. And I think focusing on those types of businesses are really good. That's easier said than done. I don't know how you do that. Like, I think it's like you got to keep producing We have great schools here. We got lots of educated people, and we need to give them the support, both from the government side and from the venture side, that they feel confident in going out there and starting these ambitious, big companies that could move our economy in the right direction. And I actually don't think that's the case right now. And that's another thing in Alex Danko's piece, which is the government programs that we have today are bloated, filled with lots of paperwork, and very slow. And we need to get over the idea that the government has to make these like, we're going to waste money. And that's okay, because with that wasted money, we're going to find a couple gems that do really well and move our economy and country in the right direction. And I think we need to get more comfortable with that. And I think investors need to get more comfortable with that as well.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think one of the really big exciting things that's starting to happen in Canada is we're starting to get our own mega world beater companies, and they're just starting. Like you see
Totally.
Shopify, right? And you just wrote about Backbone, which is that group of Shopify executives now investing in other future businesses, and that's where you really start to see the Silicon Valley effect, right? Like you really start like those big companies then actually planting the seeds of future companies. And we need to do that, as you said, in the future technologies. Like we need an inclusive economy. We need a clean tech economy. We need to focus on blockchain and AI. Like the more that we do that and we get that
Totally.
flywheel effect, the better for this country. And I'm just so excited.
It's not the first time we've seen this either. You saw it with BlackBerry, you saw it with Nortel, the similar follow-on effect, and I absolutely agree. And I see it with Uber today. Yeah, I'm in this ex-Uber Facebook group, and the amount of companies that these people are starting, it's incredible. And they're big, ambitious ideas, and not just in Canada but around the world. And so I've seen that effect, and I think it will happen with Shopify, and it will happen with the other big Canadian tech companies. So it's exciting. I agree with you.
That's awesome, man. All right. So one of the biggest things for me is to always ask entrepreneurs along this journey that you've been on, which you've actually been on since you were quite young. Like you've been doing this for a while. I mean, what's been the most difficult point and what's been the most rewarding for you in being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, like the most difficult points are always when things fail. And I've had a lot of failures in my career, and you just feel terrible. You feel like you let a bunch of people down. You're lost. You don't know what's going to happen next. And that's always a very, very challenging period. It was a challenging period when, we had the fallout with our partner at Adrenaline. It was a difficult time when LineSix, when we were getting shut down, and I was kind of in between things, and I was still young at the time. It was a difficult thing with Leaf Forward, when we had to we chose to give back the money, and we closed the fund. So every time that happens, it's always very challenging. But on the flip side of that, there is an incredible exhilaration and energy you get from when things are going well. That's probably the best part of it, right? Like I've never felt, this is actually probably pretty sad if I say it this way, so I'm going to rephrase it, but I felt really good, when LineSix was taken off and like we were getting all this media and it was exciting. And it's like, yeah, I think it's kind of the same with ThePeak. I probably don't feel as good because I'm much more grounded now, but than when I was like 23. But it feels good to have built something that people like and you get good feedback on it, and that's awesome. And so that's a lot of fun. But yeah, I don't know if it makes up for the lows, but that's just the direction I've chosen. So I guess we have to go down it.
That's one of the biggest things, right? It's not waiting until, oh, I've got enough experience in this big corp for like 10 to 20 years. I'm going to launch my perfect company now. It's like, no, you've got to launch and you've got to fuck some big things up. Like you got to screw up sometimes. And that's the only way to really like actually take off. And any of the most success, like Mark Cuban's written about this, right? Michelle Romanow keeps talking about this. It's like, we don't talk enough about all the other, but like she now talks more about the caviar business because nobody knows about it, right? The one, her first business.
Yeah. And like, look, I think if there's one thing that I have really appreciated about my career, and I mentioned this at the start, it's that just doing things has always led to something else in every instance. Like starting something has grown my network, has allowed me to gain expertise in different areas, learn a lot, and that cumulatively has been extremely impactful in my advancement through my career. And each one of those pieces that I've kind of done throughout the past 10 years, it wouldn't have been possible had I not started something. So I'm a strong proponent of just starting things, taking a shot. Even if it fails, I'm fairly confident you'll be in a better place than you were before. In most instances, that might not always be true, but I think in most instances, that's the case.
I can't think of a better place to end it off than there, brother. Thank you so much for coming on.
Mark, thanks so much for having me. You're a great interviewer, and this is a great podcast. And so I was really happy to be on.